She broke up with me at dinner, in front of her friends and rolling cameras, like it was a performance she'd rehearsed. I just said good luck, stood up, and walked out, right as the room realized she hadn't planned for me to leave. My name is James. I was born in Ohio, raised in the kind of suburb where people wave from their driveways and mean it. I'm 34 years old. I work in commercial real estate, mostly redevelopment projects, old buildings given new purposes. I've always liked that idea, taking something tired and making it useful again. I was married once, briefly. No kids. I've never been the loudest person in a room, but I've never had trouble standing on my own either. Or at least, I didn't think I did. The first thing I noticed that night was the lighting. Too bright. Too intentional. The restaurant had replaced its usual warm bulbs with something sharper, whiter. It made everyone's skin look a little washed out, like we were all standing under interrogation lamps instead of pendant lights. I remember thinking it was an odd choice for a place that marketed itself as intimate, romantic, a destination for shared moments, according to the sign by the door. I was already seated when she arrived. Emily didn't walk in alone. She never did anymore. She came in with 3 of her friends clustered around her, laughing too loudly, arms brushing as if they were trying to physically hold onto the moment. Behind them, 2 men adjusted camera straps and checked lenses. Not subtle, not even pretending to be. I stood up halfway out of instinct, halfway out of habit. She smiled when she saw me, but it was the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. Polished, practiced, the one she used at charity events or brand launches. The one that meant she was already somewhere else. "Hey," she said, leaning in to kiss my cheek instead of my mouth. "You made it." I almost laughed at that, as if there had ever been a question. We'd been together 3 years, engaged for 8 months, living together for 2. I didn't miss dinners. I didn't miss moments. I was the reliable one, the steady one, the man people described as solid, which always sounded like praise until you realized it usually meant predictable. Her friends slid into the booth beside her, phones already out, menus barely glanced at. One of them, Claire, I think, gave me a quick smile that disappeared just as fast. Another avoided my eyes completely. That should have been my cue. The cameras stayed standing. No effort to tuck them away. One of the men nodded at Emily, and she nodded back, almost imperceptibly. I felt something tighten in my chest. "Are we filming something?" I asked quietly. She waved a hand. "Just some behind-the-scenes stuff. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it." A phrase that, in hindsight, had followed me through the slow collapse of our relationship like a refrain. The waiter arrived. Wine was ordered without my input. Emily chose for both of us, a red I didn't recognize. I watched her talk, watched her hands move as she explained something to her friends about a campaign launch, about timing, about optics. Words I'd heard her use more and more often lately. Optics. The cameras drifted closer. That was when she cleared her throat. She turned slightly toward me, not fully, as if committing to the angle might be too much. Her posture straightened, shoulders back, chin lifted. "Daniel," she said, and the room seemed to quiet, not because she spoke loudly, but because people were watching now. I could feel it. Nearby tables pausing mid-conversation, the waiter slowing as he passed. There's a strange awareness that comes with being the only person in a room who doesn't know what's about to happen. It's like standing on train tracks, hearing something in the distance, and not yet knowing which direction it's coming from. "I think it's important to be honest," she continued, "especially when you've shared so much of your life with someone." Her friends nodded. One of them reached for Emily's hand under the table. I didn't say anything. I was still waiting for the normal version of this conversation, the one where she leaned in, lowered her voice, and told me something uncomfortable but private. The one that ended with us walking out together, even if a little shaken. Instead, she went on. "I've been doing a lot of reflecting," she said, "and I've realized that we're not aligned anymore. Not in the ways that matter. Aligned. Another word she'd picked up recently. I don't think it's fair to either of us to keep pretending this is something it's not." My name was still echoing in my ears. The way she'd said it. Like an introduction. The cameras were closer now. I could see my reflection in the glass of one lens, warped and distant. "So," she said, taking a breath that felt theatrical even then, "I think it's best if we end this. Here. Now." The silence that followed wasn't dramatic. It was confused. Heavy. The kind that presses down on your shoulders instead of exploding outward. For a brief, absurd moment. I wondered if this was a joke, some kind of test, a setup for a bigger reveal. But then I saw her face. Relief, mixed with nerves, and something else. Anticipation. I looked at the people around us. Her friends, watching carefully. The cameras, unwavering. Strangers pretending not to stare. No one was looking at me with concern. They were looking at me like a variable. I felt oddly calm. I don't remember standing up. I only remember being on my feet. Okay, I said. It was louder than I expected. Steadier, too. Emily blinked. Just once. I added, because something in me wanted to be clear, good luck. That was it. No speech. No accusation. No question. I slid my napkin onto the table, right beside the untouched bread. I didn't look at the cameras again. I didn't look at her friends. I looked at Emily, just long enough to see the moment register. The moment when she realized this wasn't going the way she'd imagined. Then I turned and walked away. The silence followed me. I felt it on my back as I moved through the restaurant, past the bar, past the host's stand, through the door, and out into the night. It wasn't until the cool air hit my face that I realized my hands were shaking. I didn't get far before I heard it. A sound, muffled by glass and distance, but unmistakable. Crying. Not quiet. Not contained. The kind that pulls attention whether you want it or not. I didn't turn around. I walked to my car, got in, and sat there with my forehead against the steering wheel, breathing in slow, measured counts like I'd been taught years ago during a stress management seminar I'd never expected to need. 1, 2, 3. I didn't feel victorious, or devastated, or even angry. I felt hollow. And somewhere behind that hollowness, a question was beginning to form. Not about what she'd done, or why, but about how long she'd been planning it. Because that kind of announcement doesn't happen on impulse. And that realization, that this moment had been rehearsed, framed, lit, and staged, was the first crack in a much larger understanding. I started the car. As I pulled away, my phone buzzed in the cup holder. I didn't look at it. Not yet. I didn't drive home after I left the restaurant. That realization came later, when I tried to reconstruct the night in my head and noticed the gap where the familiar route should have been. I'd always gone home after arguments, after bad meetings, after losses. Home was where things settled, where I could line objects back up and convince myself nothing fundamental had changed. That night, the idea of stepping into the apartment felt wrong. Too soon. Too exposed. So I kept driving. The city blurred past me in fragments. Traffic lights, storefronts, people crossing streets with purpose I suddenly envied. My phone buzzed in the cup holder. I turned it face down without looking. Whatever was waiting there could wait longer. At a red light, I noticed my hands. White-knuckled. My shoulders were tight, lifted almost to my ears. I forced myself to loosen my grip on the steering wheel and take a slow breath. Then another. The sound of her crying came back to me then. Not the emotion of it. The timing. She hadn't cried when she ended things. Not when she spoke. Not when I stood up. She cried after I was gone, after the audience was left without its counterweight. That detail lodged itself somewhere deep and stayed there. I pulled into the parking lot of a grocery store that never closed. Left the engine running. Watched automatic doors slide open and shut as strangers came and went with carts full of milk, bread, cereal. Proof that the world hadn't paused just because mine had. I finally picked up my phone. Missed calls. Messages. Numbers I didn't recognize. Emily's name repeated enough times to feel like pressure. I didn't open any of it. Instead, I texted my sister. "Are you up?" Her reply came almost instantly. "Yeah. What's going on?" I stared at the screen, the words swimming a little. "Can I come over? I don't want to be alone." She wrote. Doors open. The drive to her place felt quieter, less frantic. When I pulled up, the porch light was already on, casting a soft pool of yellow across the steps. She opened the door before I knocked. She didn't ask anything right away, just wrapped her arms around me and held on. I stood there longer than I meant to, my forehead resting against her shoulder, the tension finally leaking out of my body in small, embarrassing waves. Inside, she handed me a mug and sat across from me at the kitchen table. "Whenever you're ready," she said. So I told her. I kept it simple. The dinner. The cameras. The way Emily had spoken like she was delivering a statement instead of ending a relationship. I didn't embellish. I didn't soften it either. My sister listened without interrupting. When I finished, she leaned back and exhaled slowly. "That wasn't spontaneous," she said. "No," I replied. That's what scares me. She nodded. It was planned. I slept on her couch that night. Not deeply. I drifted in and out, the ceiling fan carving slow circles above me. Every time I woke, my chest felt tight again, like I'd forgotten to breathe. By morning, my phone felt heavier than it had the night before. Emily had left voicemails. I listened to the first while my sister made coffee in the other room. Her voice sounded smaller without an audience. Urgent. Controlled. Daniel, please call me. We need to talk. You didn't have to leave like that. I stopped it there. The second message was longer. Defensive. She cried in that one, but it felt measured, like she was trying to strike the right balance between vulnerable and wronged. The third was short. You made me look awful. I sat there for a long time after that, phone resting in my hand. Later, against my better judgment, I opened social media. Clips were already circulating. Edited. Captioned. Framed. Her words trimmed into something brave and cinematic. Me reduced to a silent figure standing up and walking away. The comments were worse. Strangers dissecting my posture, my expression, my lack of reaction. Deciding who I was based on seconds of footage. I closed the app and didn't open it again. That afternoon, I went back to the apartment while Emily was out. I knew she would be. She'd posted something vague about healing in space, tagged at a spa downtown. I moved through the rooms quietly, like a guest overstaying his welcome. I packed clothes, books, a few personal things. I avoided the framed photos. Left my key on the counter. Before I left, I stood in the doorway and looked around. Not with nostalgia. With clarity. This place was finished with me. That evening, an article went live. Longer. Polished. Emily talking about courage and growth. Me described as reserved and emotionally unavailable. I didn't respond. The next day, she called from a number I didn't recognize. I answered before I thought better of it. Why are you ignoring me? She demanded. There's nothing to talk about, I said. You embarrassed me, she snapped. You could have stayed. You could have helped me explain. I leaned against the wall, eyes closed. You didn't ask me to explain, I said. You announced it. There was a pause. Then, quieter, they're attacking me online. I waited. I just need you to say something, she continued. One sentence. To calm it down. I thought about the lights. The cameras. The way my name had sounded like a cue. No, I said. Her voice sharpened. Why are you doing this to me? Because, I replied, this is the first part of this that I get to decide. She hung up. I blocked her number. That night, lying in my sister's spare room, I stared at the dark and let the silence settle. It wasn't comforting, but it was real. For the first time since the dinner, I felt something solid beneath the shock. Not anger. Relief. I didn't know what the fallout would look like. I didn't know how long my name would be dragged through conversations I wasn't part of. But I knew one thing with certainty. Whatever story was being told without me, it no longer had control over my life. The silence didn't last. It never does. 3 days after the dinner, my name stopped trending in small corners of the internet and started circulating in places closer to my real life. Work. Friends. People who had known us as a couple, not a clip. My boss called me into his office mid-morning. He didn't mention the videos at first. Just asked how I was doing. Said he'd noticed I'd taken a sick day and wanted to check in. He was careful with his words, like someone walking across ice they weren't sure would hold. Eventually, he cleared his throat. I just want you to know, he said, that whatever's going on, you don't owe anyone here an explanation. I nodded. I appreciated that more than I could say. But explanations have a way of happening anyway. A colleague stopped me near the elevator later that day. Asked if I was okay. Another sent a message saying she'd seen something online and hoped I was holding up. None of them asked directly. None of them needed to. Their restraint was its own kind of kindness. What surprised me was who didn't reach out. People Emily and I had spent years with. Couples we'd double-dated. Friends who had toasted our engagement with real enthusiasm, not the polite kind. Their silence felt intentional, like they were waiting to see which version of the story would solidify before choosing where to stand. I didn't blame them. I understood hesitation more than I ever had. The messages from strangers, though, kept coming. Some sympathetic, others cruel, a few almost admiring in a way that made my skin crawl. Men congratulating me for keeping my dignity. Women accusing me of emotional neglect. Everyone projecting something onto a situation they'd experienced only through fragments. I learned quickly not to read too many. One evening, while my sister was still at work, I sat alone on her back porch and watched dusk settle over the neighborhood. The air was warm, heavy with the smell of cut grass. Somewhere nearby, a radio played softly. A normal evening, trying its best to remain normal. That was when my phone buzzed again. Not Emily. Her mother. I stared at the name until the screen dimmed. Then I let it ring out. She left a voicemail. I listened to it an hour later, bracing myself. Her voice was strained, careful. Daniel, I know this is a difficult time. I just wanted to say I'm sorry it ended this way. Emily is struggling. I hope you can find it in your heart to speak with her when things calm down. She paused before adding, you were family to us. I set the phone down and closed my eyes. Family. Another word that carried weight only when it was convenient. That night, I dreamed about the restaurant again. Only this time, when I stood up, the floor tilted, and the cameras followed me all the way to the door, lenses stretching, warping, never letting me leave the frame. I woke with my heart racing. The next morning, I went back to work and buried myself in tasks that didn't require feeling. Numbers, emails, deadlines, familiar territory, control through competence. At lunch, I stepped outside with a sandwich and checked my phone out of habit. There it was. A longer post from Emily. No video this time. Just text. She wrote about heartbreak, about growth being painful, about learning that love sometimes means letting go even when it hurts. She thanked her friends for support, thanked her followers for kindness. She never used my name, but she didn't need to. The comments flooded in within minutes. Praise, sympathy, affirmation. I scrolled once, twice, then stopped. What bothered me wasn't the story she told. It was the certainty with which she told it. As if this ending had always been inevitable. As if I had simply failed to evolve quickly enough to keep up. That afternoon, someone knocked on my sister's door. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened it, I almost didn't recognize him. Mark, one of Emily's oldest friends. He'd been at our engagement party, helped us move into the apartment. The kind of guy who always showed up with beer and opinions. He looked uncomfortable standing there, hands in his pockets. Hey, he said, can I come in? I hesitated, then stepped aside. We sat at the kitchen table. He didn't touch the glass of water I offered. I'm not here to defend her, he said quickly. Before you think that. I waited. She didn't tell us she was going to do it like that, he continued. The dinner, the cameras, that part caught a lot of us off guard. A familiar tightness formed in my chest. So you knew she was going to end it, I said. He nodded. She talked about it for weeks. Weeks. She said she needed it to be definitive, he went on. Clean. Public. So there wouldn't be any confusion. I leaned back in my chair. And did you know she was planning to film it? He hesitated. That was answer enough. I told her it was a bad idea, he said. For what it's worth. I let out a quiet breath. Why are you telling me this? Mark looked down at his hands. Because, he said slowly, she keeps saying you abandoned her. That you blindsided her by leaving. And that's not sitting right with me. Silence stretched between us. She wanted control, I said. He nodded. Yeah. Then she got it, I added. Just not all of it. He didn't argue. When he left, I felt lighter. Not vindicated. Just seen. The truth hadn't changed anything publicly. But it had anchored something inside me that had been drifting. That night, Emily tried to reach me again. A new number. A longer message. She said she was sorry for how things happened. That she hadn't meant for it to feel like an ambush. That she'd thought honesty in public was better than secrecy in private. She said she missed me. That she hoped we could talk. Just the two of us, without noise. I read it twice. Then I deleted it. Not out of anger. Out of clarity. Some conversations only exist to soothe the person who initiated them. The following weekend, I moved into a short-term rental near my office. Small. Sparse. Quiet. My sister helped me carry boxes, neither of us talking much. We didn't need to. On the last trip, she paused by the door. You okay? She asked. I think so, I said. And for the first time, it felt like a real answer. That night, alone in a new space, I sat on the floor with my back against the wall and let the quiet stretch as long as it wanted to. No notifications. No voices. No audience. Just me. I thought about the man I'd been in that restaurant. The version of myself that stood up, said 2 words, and walked away without knowing what came next. I didn't feel brave when I did it. I felt finished. And now, sitting there in the dim light of a place that didn't yet feel like mine, I realized something else. Walking away hadn't been the ending. It had been the first moment the story stopped being about what she wanted people to see and started becoming about what I was finally willing to live with. I didn't know what the next chapter looked like, but for the first time in a long while, that uncertainty didn't feel like loss. It felt like room. The apartment began to feel less like a shelter and more like a holding pattern. I'd been in the short-term rental for almost 3 weeks by then, long enough to learn which floorboards creaked, how late the upstairs neighbors stayed awake, which direction the morning light came from. Not long enough to feel settled. My boxes stayed half unpacked. Clothes lived in piles instead of drawers. It was easier that way. Temporary spaces don't ask you to commit. Work filled most of my days. Evenings were quiet. Too quiet sometimes. I cooked simple meals. Watched shows I didn't care about. Fell asleep on the couch more than once with the lights still on. The noise, when it came digitally. Emily stopped trying to reach me directly after I blocked the last number. Instead, her presence filtered through mutual acquaintances. Someone would mention seeing her. Someone else would ask if I'd read her latest post. Each update arrived secondhand, softened or sharpened depending on who delivered it. She's not doing great. One friend told me over coffee, like that was something I was meant to fix. She says she regrets how it happened. Another said, "Eyes careful." I nodded. Said very little. Regret, I'd learned, didn't always mean responsibility. Sometimes it just meant the outcome hadn't landed the way someone expected. One Friday afternoon, an email landed in my inbox with no subject line. It was from a production company. I read it twice before the words settled. They were requesting permission to use footage from The Dinner in a longer format piece about modern relationships and public vulnerability. They framed it as respectful, collaborative, optional. I closed the email without replying. 10 minutes later, my phone rang. Unknown number. I let it ring out. A voicemail followed. "Daniel, this is Aaron from Lark Media. We'd really love to hear your perspective. Your silence is powerful, but your voice could add balance." Balance. I deleted the message. That night, something in me finally reached its limit. It wasn't anger. It was exhaustion. I realized that as long as I stayed quiet, other people would keep filling the space with their interpretations. Not because they were malicious, because humans hate unfinished narratives. They rush to close loops, even if the shape is wrong. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want to correct every lie or soften every exaggeration. But I also didn't want to disappear. The following Sunday, my sister invited me to dinner. Just the two of us. No ceremony. Pasta, salad, a bottle of wine we wouldn't finish. Halfway through the meal, she set her fork down and looked at me. "You don't have to stay silent forever," she said. "I know," I replied. "You're allowed to say your part," she added. "Even if it's just once." I twirled pasta I didn't eat. "I'm afraid if I speak," I admitted, "it turns into something else. A back and forth. A spectacle." She nodded. "Then don't make it one." That stayed with me. 2 days later, I wrote something. Not a post. Not a statement. Just a page in a notes app. No names. No accusations. Just facts. How it felt. What I'd agreed to. What I hadn't. Where the line had been crossed. I didn't publish it. But writing it changed something. It clarified the boundary between my truth and the noise around it. That clarity came just in time. The invitation arrived on Thursday. Emily's friend Claire reached out, careful and overly polite, asking if I would attend a small dinner the following weekend. "A chance to clear the air," she wrote. "No cameras. Just friends." I stared at the message for a long time. My first instinct was no. My second was anger. At the idea that I should be the one to step back into a room after everything had already been decided without me. Then I noticed the unspoken detail. Emily wouldn't ask me herself. She never did when the conversation carried risk. I typed out 3 different responses and deleted them all. Finally, I wrote, "I'll come, but only if we're honest." The reply came quickly. Of course. I didn't believe it, but I went anyway. The restaurant was smaller than the first one. No private room. No lighting drama. Just a long table in the back, already half full when I arrived. Emily was there. She looked different. Less polished. Hair pulled back without intention. No dramatic outfit. She stood when she saw me, hesitated, then sat back down. The room went quiet in a way that felt familiar. I stayed standing for a moment. Let myself breathe. "Hi," I said. "Hi," she replied. I took the empty seat across from her. The food arrived quickly, like the staff had been instructed not to let space linger. Conversation stumbled forward. "Updates. Neutral topics. People pretending their plates needed more attention than the tension sitting between us. Eventually, Emily spoke. "I want to apologize," she said, "for how things happened." Her voice shook. "Real this time. Or real enough. I didn't mean to hurt you," she continued. "I thought being public would make it cleaner. I was wrong." I looked at her. Really looked. "I believe you didn't want to hurt me," I said. "But you wanted control more." Her face fell. "I needed closure," she said softly. "You took it," I replied. "From both of us." Silence spread across the table. Someone shifted in their seat. Someone else took a drink. "I didn't think you'd leave," Emily said. "I thought you'd stay and talk." "That was the mistake," I said. "You thought you knew what I would do." Tears welled in her eyes. The room tensed, ready to react. I didn't move. "I'm not angry," I said, "but I'm done carrying responsibility for how this looks." She nodded, wiping at her face. "I miss you," she whispered. I shook my head, slow and final. "You miss how safe it felt," I said. "Not who I was becoming." No one argued. No one clapped. No one knew what to do next. That was the strangest part. The absence of direction. After a few minutes, I stood. "I wish you well," I said, and meant it, in the way you mean something when it no longer costs you anything. I left cash on the table and walked out. Outside, the air was cool. Honest. I stood there longer than necessary, letting the night settle around me. This time, I didn't hear crying behind me. I drove home, my temporary one, and unpacked the last box. For the first time since the dinner that started all of this, I slept through the night. I didn't know how the story would end in other people's mouths. I only knew how it felt inside my own chest. Quiet. And finally mine. The weeks after that dinner didn't transform me into a new man. They just made me quieter. The noise faded slowly, not all at once. A mention here. A forwarded article there. A friend asking, carefully, how I was holding up. Each time, the distance between the story people were telling and the life I was actually living grew wider. And eventually, it stopped matching. The short-term rental turned into a 6-month lease. I bought a couch that fit the space instead of borrowing one that didn't. Hung 2 framed photos on the wall. Nothing sentimental. A landscape from a trip years ago. A black and white city shot I liked because it didn't ask questions. I fell into routines again. Morning runs before work. Coffee at the same place every day until the barista stopped asking my name. Groceries on Sunday evenings when the store was nearly empty. Ordinary things, but they felt earned. Emily's presence receded in stages. First, I stopped hearing updates from mutual friends. Then her posts stopped appearing in suggested feeds. Finally, I realized I hadn't thought about her for an entire afternoon. That was the moment that surprised me. Not because I missed her. Because I didn't. One afternoon in early fall, I ran into someone from the restaurant. The original one. I was waiting for a table at a different place across town when a woman behind the host's stand squinted at me. "Hey," she said cautiously. "You were right." She gestured vaguely, like the memory itself was fragile. I nodded. She winced. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. That night was uncomfortable for a lot of people." I smiled, small and sincere. "It was worse for some than others," I said. She laughed softly, relieved, and handed me my pager. As I waited, I realized something else. I wasn't carrying the moment anymore. It had happened. It had shaped me, but it no longer lived in my body. A month later, I deleted the Notes app entry I'd written after my sister's dinner. I didn't need it anymore. The words had done their work. They'd helped me understand where my line was, where it still would be. Work picked up. A new project. A promotion conversation that felt grounded instead of performative. I said yes to things again. Trips. Dinners. Invitations I'd declined before because it felt easier to stay in. One evening, sitting across from a woman I'd met through a friend, I caught myself laughing without restraint. It startled me. She noticed. "You okay?" she asked, smiling. "Yeah," I said, and meant it. I didn't tell her my story. Not that night. Maybe not ever. Some things don't need to be front-loaded. Some things are allowed to stay in the past without explanation. On the anniversary of the dinner, though I hadn't marked it intentionally, I took myself out for a walk after work. The air was crisp, leaves scattered across the sidewalk in uneven patterns. I stopped at a cafe, ordered coffee, sat by the window. No cameras. No audience. Just glass and light, and a man drinking something warm. I thought about that version of myself again. The one who stood up, said 2 words, and left a room that expected him to play a part. I understood him better now. He wasn't dramatic. He was done negotiating his own presence. That night had taught me something I hadn't known I needed to learn. That dignity doesn't announce itself. It doesn't argue. It doesn't explain. It doesn't wait for permission. Sometimes it just stands up and walks away.